History is often written in blood, but the end of the age began with sand. Look upon the violet spires of Dalaran, the city of mages, the pinnacle of human arrogance. They believed their wards were impenetrable. They believed their understanding of the arcane made them gods. But when the Defiler came, he did not wage war. He did not siege their walls. He simply unmade them. Archimonde, the Eredar Lord. Watch as he traces a rune in the dirt. A child toppling a sandcastle. The great towers of the Kirin Tor crumble into dust, not from the force of catapults, but from the sheer weight of his will. The sky over the eastern kingdoms turned the color of bruised flesh, and the air itself tasted of ash. The message was absolute. Civilization was not ending. It was already over. And watching the world burn was a ghost, the Prophet Medivh. He was no longer the guardian of Tirisfal, draped in glory. He was a wanderer, a man hollowed out by his own sins. He knew that to fight the burning legion in the east was to die. The soil was already poisoned. The dead walked the streets of Lordaeron, fueled by the Lich King's malice. There was no victory to be found in the homes of their fathers. So he whispered to the desperate, to the young war chief, Thrall, who sought a destiny for his people beyond the slave camps, to the sorceress Jaina Proudmoore, who saw the rot spreading through the hearts of princes. Go west. That was the command. Across the great sea, into the mist. They sailed not as conquerors, but as refugees. The orcs in their stolen ships, the humans in their ragged fleets. They fled the dying light of the east toward a legend, Kalimdor, the land of eternal starlight. They hoped for sanctuary. They hoped for peace. But as their boots touched the red dust of the barrens, they did not find a haven. They found a land that remembered the first time the sky broke open. They found an ancient, savage world that was waiting to judge them. Kalimdor was not empty. The trees of Ashenvale were ancient before the first human castle laid its foundation stone. And these trees, they had eyes. The refugees did not find salvation here. They found a ghost story come to life. The Night Elves, the Kaldori, the children of the stars. For 10,000 years they had slept and watched, guarding the wound of the world. To them, the orcs were not noble wanderers seeking redemption. They were locusts, green-skinned brutalities stripping the bark from the sacred groves. And humans, short-lived, magically addicted children playing with fire. The tension was not merely political, it was biological. It was the friction of oil and water, of shadow and flame. Consider Grom Hellscream, the war song, a warrior defined by the demon blood that once coursed through his veins. In the shadowed canopy of Ashenvale, the old hunger returned. The Legion knew he was there. Manaroth, the Pit Lord, spilled his blood into the fountains once more, and Hellscream drank. He did not drink for power. He drank because he was afraid. And in that fear, he committed the unforgivable. He slew Cenarius, the Lord of the Forest, the demigod who taught the first druids the language of nature. When Hellscream's axe split the demigod's flesh, the sky over Hyjal wept. The Night Elves did not just feel anger. They felt a horror so profound it froze their hearts. The orcs were not just invaders, they were the Legion's vanguard. Tyrande Whisperwind, the High Priestess of the Moon, looked upon the Outlanders with the cold, silver eyes of judgment. She had fought the Burning Legion when the world was one continent. She remembered the smell of fel, and now, she saw it on the axes of the orcs and the staves of the humans. Why should she spare them? Why should the immortals lower themselves to parley with the mayflies of the eastern kingdoms? It was the prophet who dragged them into the light. Deep within the Stone Talon Peak, in the cavern of the Oracle, they met. Not as friends, not as allies, but as enemies cornered by a predator too large to comprehend. Picture the scene. The flickering torchlight catching the steel of Jaina Proudmoore's guards, the heavy breathing of Thrall's wolves, and the silent, predatory grace of Malfurion Stormrage, freshly awakened from the Emerald Dream, standing beside Tyrande. Swords were half-drawn. Magic hummed in the air, sharp and ozone-rich. The hate in that room was palpable. Years of war, centuries of prejudice, millennia of isolation. The orcs remembered the internment camps. The humans remembered Stormwind burning. The elves remembered the War of the Ancients. Medivh stepped from the shadows, casting off his hood. He did not offer them comfort. He offered them the truth. The Legion was not coming for the orcs. It was not coming for the humans. It was coming for the World Tree, Nordrassil, the root of all life on Azeroth. If the tree fell, the demons would drain its energies and become unstoppable. History, race, honor, vengeance, none of it mattered. The sands of the hourglass run out, he told them. United, you have a chance. Divided, you are already dead. It was the hardest choice of the Third War. Not the charge into battle, but the lowering of the weapon. The moment Thrall nodded to Jaina, the moment Malfurion placed a restraining hand on Tyranda's arm, they had to swallow their pride. A pill more bitter than poison, and march together toward the summit, toward the mountain where the sky was already burning. The summit of Mount Hyjal is the closest a mortal can stand to the heavens. The air is thin, crisp, and smells of pine needles that have fallen for 10,000 years. It is a place of absolute serenity. But on that day, the mountain did not smell of pine. It smelled of sulfur. It smelled of wet fur, rusting iron, and the copper tang of spilled blood. The Alliance, the Horde, and the Night Elves did not march to Hyjal to win. The Prophet had been clear. There was no victory to be found in the clash of swords. You do not defeat a storm by stabbing it. You weather it. The plan was a desperate gamble. Delay the Defiler. Buy time. Seconds paid for in battalions. Minutes purchased with the extinction of bloodlines. At the base of the pass stood the humans, Jaina Proudmoore and the remnants of Lordaeron. Look at them. Their armor is dented, their shields splintered from the long retreat across the sea. They are the survivors of the Scourge, men who had watched their own families turn into mindless ghouls. Now, they dug their boots into the mud of a foreign land to defend a tree they did not understand. The first wave did not look like an army. It looked like a plague. The Scourge washed over the human barricades like a tide of black oil. Ghouls, crypt fiends, abominations stitched together from the meat of the fallen. And behind them, the true horror, the burning legion. The sky tore open. Infernals, living meteors of green stone and fell fire, rained down upon the human camp. The impact tremors shattered the earth. We saw the Archmage, Jaina, weaving spells of ice and brilliance, a lighthouse in the dark. Her water elementals boiled into steam the moment they touched the Legion's vanguard. It was a massacre. For every demon that fell, 10 humans were broken. But they held. For an hour, 2, time loses its meaning when the sky is screaming. When the order finally came to fall back, it was not a retreat. It was a collapse. Jaina vanished in a flash of teleportation magic, leaving behind a smoking crater where the hope of humanity had stood. The Legion stepped over the corpses of the Alliance without pausing. They climbed higher, and there, waiting in the jagged rocks of the mid-slope, was the Horde. This was the crucible of Thrall, the war chief, the slave gladiator who had promised his people a new beginning. Here, facing the very demons who had enslaved the orcs a generation ago, the Horde found its soul. This was not the bloodlust of the First War. This was not the berserker rage that had burned Stormwind. This was cold, grim discipline. The grunts stood shoulder to shoulder with the Tauren, those massive walkers of the plains. When the Legion crashed into the orcish lines, it was the sound of a sledgehammer hitting an anvil. Pit lords, massive and bloated with hate, swung double-bladed glaives that sheared through plate and bone alike. Fellhounds, with their mana-draining tentacles, hunted the shamans, ripping the connection to the elements right out of their throats. Thrall stood in the center of the storm, the doom hammer lightning-charged, screaming defiance at the masters of his ancestors. Every swing was an apology. Every demon slain was a chain broken. But the Legion is infinite. The orcs were not fighting an enemy. They were fighting entropy itself. The sheer weight of the demonic onslaught pushed them back, step by bloody step. The red rocks of the canyon turned black with ichor. When Thrall signaled the retreat, the pride of the orcs was left on that battlefield, buried under a mountain of green fire. The Defiler continued his ascent. Archimonde. He did not run. He did not shout. He simply walked. He was colossal, his skin the color of deep twilight, his movements fluid and terrifyingly graceful. He ignored the arrows of the rangers. He ignored the lightning of the shamans. To him, the combined might of Azeroth's armies was nothing more than brambles catching on his robe. He swatted them aside, His eyes were fixed on the summit. On the World Tree, Nordrassil. Finally, at the very gates of the sacred grove, stood the Night Elves. Malfurion Stormrage, Tyrande Whisperwind, the Sentinels, the Druids of the Claw and the Talon. They were fighting on the bones of their own culture. Every tree that burned was a memory lost. The forest itself rose up to fight. The trees uprooted, thrashing their limbs against the Doomguards. The very grass seemed to snare the feet of the invaders. But fell magic is a cancer. It eats nature. The treants caught fire, screaming silently as they turned into torches. The beautiful, violet night of the Elven lands was choked by the sickly green smog of the twisting nether. The Night Elves fought with the ferocity of the dying. They knew that if Archimonde touched the tree, it was not just death. It was erasure. The well of eternity beneath the roots would be drained. The world would be hollowed out. Archimonde crested the final ridge. He stood before the World Tree, glowing with a power that made the air hum and vibrate until teeth ached. He looked at the massive trunk, glowing with the enchantment of the dragon aspects, and he laughed. It was a sound like tectonic plates grinding together. The defenders were broken, the humans were scattered, the orcs battered, the elves decimated. The path was clear. The Defiler reached out a hand, his fingers lengthening, ready to seize the heart of the world and drink it dry. He believed he had won. He believed that power was the only truth. He did not see the trap. He did not hear the horn. At the roots of the world, arrogance met its end. Archimonde wrapped his hands around the trunk of Nordrassil. He began to pull, to drain the magic that held the planet together. But Malfurion Stormrage did not strike him with lightning. He did not summon the roots to strangle him. He simply raised the horn of Cenarius to his lips and blew. A low, mournful note echoed through the valleys. It was not a battle cry. It was a summons. From the forests, from the air, from the very soil they came. The wisps, the spirits of the ancient dead. Thousands of them. 10,000 years of ancestors. They did not look like soldiers. They looked like stars falling upward. They swarmed the Eredar Lord. Archimonde swatted at them, confused. What could fireflies do to a god? But they did not burn him with fire. The scream of the Defiler shattered the windows of the sky. Then, white, the explosion tore the summit apart. It stripped the flesh from Archimonde's bones and left his skeleton hanging from the scorched branches of the World Tree like a macabre trophy. The shockwave leveled the forest. The Legion, decapitated, broke and fled into the dark places of the world. Silence fell over Mount Hyjal. Malfurion, Tyrande, Thrall, and Jaina stood amidst the ash. It was snowing. Gray flakes of burnt bark. The world was saved, but the price was absolute. Look at the Night Elves. In that explosion, they gave up their greatest gift. The blessing of the aspects broken. They were no longer ageless. For the first time in 10 millennia, they felt the cold wind and knew that one day, they too would die. The unity of the mortal races had held just long enough to survive the apocalypse. But as the smoke clears, and the weary armies look at one another across the crater, the old hatreds begin to stir. The Legion is gone. But in the frozen north, the Lich King sits on his frozen throne, and he is patient. The Third War is over. The long, cold night is just beginning.